Heroes of Fantasy Football Podcast.
And welcome back, everybody. My name is Christopher Felice, and welcome to another episode of the Heroes of Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host for tonight and the only one on the show, so without further ado, let's just get right into it to another waiver show. Starting up here, we're going to go over our bye weeks really fast. This week upcoming, we got the Cardinals, the Buccaneers, the Panthers, and the Giants on bye week. So when you are listening to the show and you're thinking about your waiver choices, make sure you keep that in mind. I mean, you know, for some of these teams, you don't got a lot going on. I mean, the Cardinals, you know, inconsistency. Kyler, Marvin Harrison Jr. is there. James Conner is kind of like the only really solid rock going on. For the Buccaneers, obviously a lot of injuries have already happened. Rachaad White looks okay, but everything else looks a little shoddy. Between the Panthers and the Giants, I mean, we saw how that game went in Germany. We're going to move on from there now. As a Giants fan, it hurts me so. So without further ado, let's get on into our main event here, the waivers. Starting up with the quarterback, we got four people to talk about here. Nothing too crazy. The first one is probably the most popular one here. Justin Herbert, 55% rostered on Yahoo. His next matchup is going to be against the Bengals. This past week, he went 14 for 19 attempts, 164 yards, 1 touchdown, and he also had 9 rushing attempts for 32 yards and 1 touchdown on the ground. Just a solid performance overall. He's really good. No one's super duper surprised. He's making the best out of the situation that he has, which kudos to him. You're doing great, guy. With that being said, they have the matchup coming up, the Bengals. We are plenty aware of the sort of horrible defensive structure going on within the Bengals. So, you know, I feel like it's a pretty safe bet to have him on there, considering how explosive he's going to be. Moving on, we have Matt High's favorite quarterback, Derek Carr, rostered at 12% on Yahoo, going up against the Browns next week. He went 20. My apologies, I have a typo here. He completed 26 passes for 269 yards, 2 touchdowns, and went 4 for 17 on the ground. I'm going to just really fast confirm that. But Derek Carr looked really fantastic last week. Nothing to really sneeze at. The issue that we have here is kind of the options that he chose. There were concerns going through like the offense this week on what that was going to look like, what was happening, what was going on with all the injuries and whatnot that was occurring. Okay, my apologies. Going back to the stats here, I added a 1 instead of a 2. He completed 16 passes on 25 attempts for 269 yards and 2 touchdowns. So my apologies. But moving on, like I was saying before, with all the injuries going on here, it definitely seemed like it was going to be a semi-down week. It wasn't. That was due in part to someone who we might mention later on when we get to the wide receiver portion. But definitely someone I would be a little hesitant on personally. I'm not a huge fan of the Derek Carr train right now. It seems inconsistent. I'm a little worried about it considering everything going on there. But hey, who knows? I'm not an NFL GM or coach or anything else like that. So you know what? If you want to lay out all your trust in Derek Carr, he has a matchup against the Browns next week. The Browns are no joke. They're definitely not a horrible defense, but eventually the defense is going to get tired out because that offense can simply not get anything going. Jameis Winston is Jameis Winston. Definitely not the solution to the offense. So just something to keep in mind as we move forward with this. Okay, moving on. We got Bo Nix, 33% rostered on Yahoo, going up against the Falcons next week. He went 22. He had 22 completions for 30 attempts, 215 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He continues to impress. He's looking really good. He had a fantastic showing last week against the Chiefs. Unfortunately, obviously, things happen. Block punt, didn't win, but they were very close. Kudos to Bo Nix for getting it to kind of punch through that Chiefs defense, which seemed really, really good. Like that inspired a lot of confidence in me. Cortland Sutton also had a fantastic week. Honestly, it's very big positives all around from the Broncos camp at the current moment. So really, honestly, like I very much am trusting of Bo Nix for like a good portion of the season. I would say that he's still a streaming quarterback, but I think I think there are like tiers of streaming quarterbacks where if you have a streaming quarterback that's like maybe heading into a slightly more difficult matchup, you might feel okay starting him anyway, solely because of how good he is, right? If he's going against like some of like the really big titans of defense at this moment, right? You can sit him, but I think for most matchups, he's going to be pretty safe. And going up against the Falcons, I feel pretty confident starting him. Moving on to our last quarterback, we got Russell Wilson, 22% rostered on Yahoo going up against the Ravens next week. He had 14 completions and 28 attempts, 195 yards, and 3 touchdowns. We're not going to lie, the 3 touchdowns definitely saved the week here. The 14 completions on 28 attempts isn't the best number in the world, obviously. And he's going up against the Ravens next week. Definitely going to be a semi-good test here on like how much he can keep up with this. On the other side of the ball, Lamar Jackson and that high-powered offense. Definitely going to be interesting to see. The Ravens haven't looked like insanely good on the defensive side. There's always a threat there, but they have not. This isn't the Ravens of old from like the couple of years back where we've had like them in like the top 5 discussion multiple years in a row. This is definitely some holes that can be exposed here. So we're gonna, this sort of chemistry between Russell Wilson and George Pickens, something to kind of bolster off of and keep moving forward. Definitely something to look at. So I would feel confident starting Russell Wilson if I had to, although my first pick, if I can get him, Justin Herbert. But as I mentioned, he's 55% rostered in Yahoo Fantasy Leagues. More than likely, he's not there. But in case he is, go pick him up. I'm going for Bo Nix. I'm gunning for a lot of fab on him. I think that's definitely a smart and key choice. Definitely something you can start for multiple weeks down the road as well. But moving on, we got our running back position. Definitely nothing too exciting here, to be quite honest with you. Honestly, neither of these guys might even make it to your starting lineup. I know one won't this at least upcoming week. So we'll start with with him. We got Trey Benson, 16% rostered in on Yahoo Fantasy Leagues. He has a bye this coming week. He went 10 for 6. He had 10 rushes for 62 yards on the ground, and he had 2 targets, caught both of them for 25 yards in the air. It's not great. It's promising to see them use Trey Benson for like a future aspect for a dynasty kind of outlook. Good for him. But for like a, I don't know, starting as a flex or running back 2 on your roster, this isn't encouraging enough. At least for me. James Conner is still there. He's still their guy. He's having a good season so far. I don't believe that he's finished a season fully yet. Like that's kind of the big stigma. He is yet to complete a full season. So stay tuned for that. Usually an injury comes in and kind of stops everything midway through. But we're hoping for the best. Obviously for James Conner, it'd be nice to see him actually finish a season for the first time. But yeah. Trey Benson, pick him up, stash him maybe. If James Conner does go down, it does look like Benson has sort of this repertoire of at least getting possibly the job done. He had a decent week last week as well. The consistency that they're having here definitely shows that he is the next guy to come up if James Conner were to go down. Moving on, we got Cam Akers, 14% roster on Yahoo, going against the Titans next week. He had 13 rushes for 38 yards on the ground and caught 1 target for 9 yards. 1 of 1. Honestly, you're only really looking at him if Aaron Jones actually stays out. I'm not entirely sure what the situation is right now. He did have to leave the game early. That's where most of this kind of work came in at the end of the game when he was out. So definitely something to monitor if you're an Aaron Jones owner. Definitely someone to look at to pick up to kind of bolster your lineup. We had talked about a couple weeks ago that they kind of picked this guy up for the just in case scenario that Aaron Jones is gone from the lineup, right? So now we're here. Aaron Jones might be gone, and they brought this guy in because they weren't confident with whoever else is down there. So that screams to me that this is definitely the backup. If you're worried about Aaron Jones, if you have him on your roster, definitely go pick this guy up. You can spend probably a decent amount of fab to go do so. No one would blame you. Definitely a safe pick. I think that's the guy I would go pick up anyway. Trey Benson doesn't have a clear path to the starting slot at the current moment. If you're going to pick him up, like, stash him, I suppose. But we're getting at that point in the season where stashing gets a little hard, right? At certain points of the season, right, you start to fill out your roster with, like, backups and people you can throw in. And because of injuries that happen, you have to, like, take people off of IR and put them in. You're making decisions really, really hard on yourself. So don't do anything too crazy trying to stash Trey Benson, or for that matter, Cam Akers if you don't have Aaron Jones, okay? Play it by week. Stuff's bound to happen. Things will look up for you as well, so nothing to worry too much about there. Let's head on over to our wide receiver portion of the show here. For these first two guys, I'm going to kind of group them together. I got Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell, 15% and 6% owned in Yahoo Fantasy Leagues, respectively, going up against the Jets next week. Alec Pierce had 7 targets, caught 4 of them for 81 yards and a touchdown, and Adonai Mitchell caught all 6 of his targets for 71 yards. It's tough to kind of trust the Colts right now. If we had Matt High here, this would be perfect. He would love this conversation. Joe Flacco kind of looks like the guy. Now things are a bit weird. The inconsistencies are showing. The kind of rust is there. There's just a lot going on here. Josh Downs also had a week last week. He had a good week. Very serviceable. So it's getting really difficult to kind of decide, like, who to start, what's going on, are the wide receivers safe? I'm going to go on a limb and say no, I wouldn't, just in case. You really don't want to deal with any of this. I know Michael Pittman did not play. Maybe with Michael Pittman back also, like, these two will kind of just fall out into the void. So definitely I would avoid these two pickups. I know they seem tantalizing. I wouldn't do it personally. Moving on to our next guy, I'm not going to bother saying his full name. I will mess it up. MVS is our next guy on the Saints. He is rostered in 2% of fantasy leagues. He is going against the Browns next week. He caught all the Reavers targets for 109 yards and 2 touchdowns. So there's a lot you could say here. You could say that this was, we talked about Derek Carr before on the episode. How he had a good week. Is this a trap? Maybe. Possibly. I don't know. Yeah, no, it probably is. It probably is a trap. I wouldn't trust this at all. He will not be hitting these numbers every single week. If you want to pick him up and stash him and you have the room and you're not dealing with, like, these, kind of sort of jumbled up roster, like, bench spots right now, I guess you can go for it maybe, because he does like to kind of stick to, look at Rashid. He was kind of a good kind of flex wide receiver 2 option for a couple weeks in a row. Maybe you can pick him up and possibly kind of slot him in some places. I wouldn't pick him up this week, nor would I start him at all. But moving on to the guy I'm actually most excited about here is Ricky Pearsall. 37% rostered in fantasy leagues on Yahoo. Going up against the Seahawks next week. He had 6 targets, 4 receptions, 73 yards, and 1 touchdown. This is a promising sign. Very, very, very promising. Juwan Jennings also had a good week last week. The reason why he's not on this list is because he was rostered in too many leagues. So that's why he's not here. But Ricky Pearsall looks really good. Hopefully this kind of trend continues as they kind of ease him back into the flow of things. If there was anybody to pick up and stash, this is him. If there's anyone to pick up and you needed a flex spot on this wide receiver list, it's Ricky Pearsall, 100%. That's my personal go-to here for the week on wide receivers. If you need him, I'm not saying do it, right? Like, if you have other options, please use them, because I don't want to fully trust it. Take that touchdown away, and it goes from a good week to a week. I'd rather have maybe some other options there that, definitely work out a little better for you. So do with caution. If you have the bench space, put him there, stash him. I did it in a bunch of weeks personally, so take my word for it. But moving on to the dark abyss, horrible position that everybody hates, tight ends. We got 2 returning guys actually on here. The position's kind of stabilizing with some of the top guys, unfortunately. Travis Kelce's kind of coming back into a groove. Sam Laporta had an okay game. So things are kind of returning to normalcy. Pat Freiermuth also kind of had a moment. He had like 10 fantasy points last week. So we got Hunter Henry at 46%. Yahoo Fantasy rostered on Yahoo Fantasy, going against the Rams next week. He had 4 targets, caught one of them for 14 yards. I don't anticipate this being like a sign of regression. I know Austin Hooper was there. He got 3 of the 4 targets. I don't anticipate him usurping this position at all. I just think it was kind of how the offense was charted out that game. They kind of manhandled the Bears, to be quite honest with you, so there wasn't too much of a need to go super complicated. Up against the Rams next week with Stafford, Puka, Kyron, and Cooper Kupp. Definitely more of a reason to kind of utilize more of your options. So I don't think I would immediately give up on the Hunter Henry train. Definitely probably still a safe pick at starting at tight end. Moving on to Taysom Hill, 53% rostered, going up against the Browns next week. He caught both his targets for 36 yards and had 4 rushes on the ground for 14 yards. Yeah, we're going back to this topic of like the weird offensive structure on the Saints right now. The MVS factor kind of, I feel like, messed with Taysom Hill just a little bit. Like I said before, I don't think MVS is going to be the guy for the foreseeable future. So if you need somebody at tight end, as much as I don't like Taysom Hill because he's too much of a wild card, I feel like it's okay to start him when the offense is this banged up and this discombobulated. It's okay. Moving on to our last segment here, we got defensive streamers for the week. We got 3 things to look at. We got the Dolphins versus the Raiders. I feel like it's a safe bet to put a defense up against the Raiders. I mean, they're, Gardner Minshew or whoever's going to start this week over there. Nothing looks too hot. We got the Colts going up against the Jets, which is a rather interesting thing to think about. I don't know how I feel about this on like an actual sort of level, but Aaron Rodgers does not look incredible. So maybe this works. I don't know. Definitely not what I'm super duper confident in personally, but I feel like if I have to make the choice, my bets might be on here. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what's happening to Aaron Rodgers with the whole camp there between Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams and whoever else and Breece Hall, but like something's not clicking correctly too early on. I mean, they were down like 30 to like 6 at one point against the Cardinals. The Cardinals with that defense. So something to kind of think about moving forward. And now you have our final defensive streamer. We got the Saints versus the Browns. The Browns disarray. We don't really have to go too much into this. I feel like this is a safe matchup per se. Going into it, the Saints haven't looked like the best defensive team, but up against the Browns, which is kind of a bit of a toss-up. And as we learn more, as teams learn more about that offense, it kind of gets better over time for other teams going into them. So definitely could be an opportunity to score an easy 8 points for your defense here. But yeah, with that being said, that's going to be our waiver show for this week. Thank you all for tuning in. Please like, share, subscribe, or whatever platform you're listening on. Please get the word out. We appreciate all of you watching this. We are recording this, or I am recording this, right before the Monday night football game starts. So if you have anybody in there, or you had anybody in there, as this will go up on Tuesday, I hope that that Monday night kind of made it for you and did not break you. And I wish you the best of luck on this upcoming week for waivers. Without further ado, good night, everybody. I'll see you around.